So as I've been on my book tour now, people sometimes ask me, is it hard to be a Jew, particularly maybe an observant Jew who's critical of Israel? And I always feel embarrassed a bit by the question because the truth is my life is so privileged and safe compared to Palestinians in Gaza or Palestinians in the West Bank and other places, and even compared to Israeli Jews who are dying or suffering, or whose family members are at risk or injured. And so my problems are just minuscule. It is true that I've lost some friends as I document in the book, but I still have a beautiful place to daven, to pray, people who are willing to study Jewish texts with me despite our political differences. And if I've lost some members, people in the Jewish community who are not interested in being my friends anymore, I also feel like I've gained a kind of a moral community that I could not have imagined, which includes many, many Palestinians and people from all different backgrounds. And what I mean by a moral community is people who simply believe in the preciousness of all life, all Palestinian life, all Israeli Jewish life, and refuse to be drawn into a politics of inhumanity, a politics of cruelty, regardless of what happens and regardless of what is done to their side. And those people are my heroes. And I feel like that's what I think of as my moral community. I want to give a couple of examples of that in the last few days in the wake of the terrible news with about the Bibas family, their terrible way in which they were returned, kind of paraded around, and the news that that the person who was initially said to be their mother, Shiri Bibas, was not her. And the first person I want to quote is my friend Mohammed Shahada, who wrote after that, um, our principles, he's talking about the Palestinian freedom struggle. He says, our principles should never be contingent on the behavior of our oppressor. This is from Muhammad, someone who, as I document in my book, lost his best friend in a terrible, terrible way during this war, who has lost so many relatives, whose family has suffered so much in Gaza. And yet he condemns what Hamas has done. He's done it consistently. He did it again in terms of their treatment of the Bibas family and the dead Bibas children, because he says that the Palestinian struggle must hold itself to a higher moral standard. The second is my friend Khalil Sayegh, also from Gaza. Khalil wrote about the way the Bibas family dead children were and family were paraded. He wrote, I opened my Facebook account where my friends who live in Gaza are and found many condemning Hamas's parade of kids' coffins. Most of these friends have endured the horror of the genocide and lost family members. I turn to X and find warriors from the West doing whataboutism. So Khalil is himself from Gaza, and he has it within him, despite everything, to condemn Hamas, even though some leftists in the West who haven't suffered in that personal way at all are making excuses for what Hamas has done. And just to understand the significance of what Khalil is able to say here, it's not only others in Gaza who have lost their closest family members, but himself as well. His father, Jerry Sayegh, died because of medical neglect and lack of access to medicine and hospital when the Holy Family Catholic Church, where he was taking refuge, was besieged. And I want to quote what Khalil wrote after his father's death about his father, Jerry Sayegh. He wrote, my father always taught me to love everyone, forgive, and never give desire for revenge space in my life. He always looked up to Christ as his model and told me I should too. As hard and painful as it is, I promise you, Dad, to stay true to those principles. That's what I mean by sharing a moral community. And this was also, by the way, a sentiment reflected by the group We Are All Hostages, the hostage group in its Twitter account, which tweeted out in response after this, a quote from a tweet from a Palestinian who wrote named Ihab Hassan, who wrote, "Don't call for revenge, call for peace." And it's really striking to me that this came on the same week as Parsha Mishpatim. Khalil is a devout Christian. I try as best as I can to be an observant Jew, and in this week's Parsha, in this week's Torah portion, Mishpatim, there is this line which says, if you see an enemy's donkey sagging under its burden, you shall not pass by, you shall surely release it with him. And Jonathan Sacks notes that the Aramaic translation, which is called the Targum, has a very interesting, different translation of this phrase. When it's on the phrase "you shall surely release," it interprets this phrase as not "you shall surely release it," referring to the donkey, that you shall release the donkey from the burden it's facing, but you shall let go of your own burden. You shall release the hatred in you, that by acting to do something, an act of humanity towards your enemy, you are releasing the hatred inside of you. That's what it means by you shall surely release it. Maimonides goes on to write as a general principle, you shall blot any offenses against you out of your mind and not bear a grudge. For as long as one nurses a grievance and keeps it in mind, one may come to take vengeance. The Torah therefore emphatically warns us not to bear a grudge, so that the impression of the wrong should be completely obliterated and no longer remembered. This is the right principle. It alone makes civilized life and social interaction possible. This is such a precious and important and fragile message now, in the wake, with the possibility that Israel seems poised to not go further to a second round of a hostage deal, despite the fact that that's what the hostage organizations want, but to launch a more aggressive war, a war that is more explicitly aimed at the mass expulsion of Palestinians in Gaza. And it has filled me with horror to see the way in which people with great prestige and credibility in Israel and the United States, people who are not associated with the far marginal right, but people in the center of our community, people who can walk into Jewish institutions and be respected and dignified and feted, have in recent weeks jumped on board this idea of mass expulsion. And I want to just quote one. I usually don't quote people by name, but I just want to quote this, and you can think about this in contrast to Khalil Sayegh and Mohammed Shahada. This is from John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, one of the most venerable Jewish magazines for many, many decades, the editor. And he's talking about the way Israeli public is now responding with fury to what they've seen of the Bibas family being paraded, but he's also endorsing this view. This is what he says. This is what he says. This is from the Commentary podcast, and I'll link to it. The hell with Gaza, the hell with everybody who lives in Gaza, the hell with it. We don't care. Stop talking to me about humanitarian aid. Stop talking to me about the suffering Gaza people. The message of Mishpatim is a profound rejection of this kind of inhumanity. Khalil Sayegh's life, Mohammed Shihada's life, even though they have endured and their families have endured 1,000, 1,000,000 times more than what John Podhoretz has living on the Upper West Side of New York, they can bring it to themselves to reject cruelty, to recognize that all human beings, all Israeli Jews, all Palestinians, the Bibas family, Khalil Sayegh's father, they're all created in the image of God. Their lives are infinitely precious. It's people who believe that who are my moral community. That's the moral community that I take faith in that will bring us to a better place.